Hi everybody, this is FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos, and today I was originally planning to take a look at some of the sidelines for black in the Ruy Lopez on move 4. So e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop e5, a6, bishop a4, and then to examine some of the fourth move alternatives to knight f6 like b5, f5, and d6. However, there was a really fantastic game played today in the World Cup. So this is from the second day of the fourth round of the World Cup, and the game was so good that I felt I needed to present it to make sure that those of you who don't normally follow big chess news, you know, like the World Cup, would see this, because it's really a very exciting game, and the finish is just spectacular. So this was played between Gadakamsky and Peter Svidler, and this was the second game, as I said, of their mini match. Svidler had won the first game with white. It was a game that probably should have been a draw. It was drawish for a long time. And then Kamsky just kind of lost the thread at one point and turned what should have been a draw to a loss. So Kamsky with white needs to win this game. And, Svidler won with white, and then Kamsky has white this game. Kamsky needs to win to send the match to tie breaks. So here we go. And now Svidler played bishop to c5. And as he explained, it's something that he plays sometimes, but he chose it for this game because Kamsky would often meet this line, had often met this line in the past, with sidelines that didn't really seem to be terribly dangerous. Alright, a4, rook b8, takes, c3, d6, d4, bishop to b6. And all of this is really well known. I mean, it's really well known if you are familiar with this variation. So many of you may not be. And that's all right. We'll discuss this in a few weeks, probably not too many weeks. But without getting into the deep theory here, the main move by a long way is knight to a3. White is going to grab the b5 pawn, but black gets very good compensation. Castles, knight b5, bishop g4, and there's just loads and loads of theory here. An alternative for white is queen to d3, getting out of the way of the pin in advance and protecting the pawn on e4. Although the pawn's not really attacked yet, because knight e4 can always be met by bishop to d5. Maybe not always, but at least for now, as long as these guys are both undefended. So there's no immediate threat. But queen to d3 has the idea of, again, sidestepping the pin. Also, it allows knight b to d2 without hanging this pawn. So that's the other big point of it. And then still another move that's more popular than the move that Kamsky chose is h3, of course, ruling out the pin in the most direct way. But Kamsky played bishop to e3, which is really a very, very rare move, and it's not a very popular move. It looks kind of harmless, but there's an idea that Kamsky has. All right, so first of all, if Svidler pointed out that if black were to play bishop to g4, knight b to d2, and now e takes d4, c d4, knight takes d4, which would seem to be the obvious way of taking advantage of White's line, then there's a little tactic. Bishop takes d4, bishop d4, and now bishop takes f7 check. And White is clearly better here, pretty close to winning, in fact. So this gives him his pawn back, and the point is that on king takes f7, White has queen to b3 check. And then he can take the knight on d4. Unless black plays bishop to e6, then there's knight to g5 check. So either way, White is in really fantastic shape here. So that means that e takes d4 is no good. Black would have to just play something like castling. And then here, White can either play queen to c2 immediately, which I suspect might be best, or h3 and then queen to c2. The reason why it might be better to hold off on h3 in this case is that bishop to g6 might be a tiny bit awkward, so maybe we don't need to rush with White to chase the bishop back to that diagonal. Anyway, whichever way it goes, White has prospects for an edge and can play for a long time without any real risk. So this is quite unlike the knight to a3 line, where whatever the status of this is going to prove to be at the end of the day, it's a very risky line for White. So he's definitely taking some real chances by playing in this way. Alright, so back to the game. Bishop to e3, and instead of bishop to g4, Svidler chose to castle. and to wait and see what white does before committing the bishop to g4. So Kamsky played knight b to d2, black cut out white's pin, and white did the same. And so in this variation, and in these Archangelsk and Mahler variations in general, when black wants to wait to fianchetto his bishop from c8 until white has played h3. So rook to e8, and now if Kamsky were to play something like rook to e1, then bishop b7 is good, d5, bishop takes e3, and here d takes c6 is no good because of bishop takes d2, and the rook on e1 is hanging. So that's what would happen there. And for that reason, Kamsky played queen to c2, which is a very sneaky little move with the idea that that line no longer works. So here, if bishop to b7, then d5 is great for white. Takes, bishop d2, c takes b7, and now the bishop has no targets. And in fact, it's just about trapped, right? Bishop to f4, there's g3, or if bishop to g5, you have h4. So this is not a good position for black. So that means the bishop to b7 is premature, and so Fiddler needed to find a good plan here. And he thought for a while, and it seems he missed something. Well, he did miss something, although it turned out not to be too terribly serious, but it was at least frightening, and he was a little bit fortunate that it didn't end up being worse than it was. So you might want to try to figure out what black should do here, make a little exercise for yourself. The answer is, well, first e takes d4, c takes d4, and now what? So the knight on c6 is attacked. Should we move the knight? Should we play bishop to b7? Maybe bishop to d7? What do we do? Well, what Fiddler played was knight to a5, and he felt pretty good about this at the time, though a few moves later he rejected this and regretted it. So probably the best move is bishop to b7. And now we can look at some variations. If rook f to e1, just a calm developing move, then black plays knight to b4. And of course black would like to drop the knight in on d3. And there's also the idea of playing c5 and maybe c4 and then knight to d3. Okay, we have to wait and see what white does in response to this plan. So black has to be aware of a couple of possibilities. One is bishop takes f7 check, king f7 and queen to b3 check. But this seems to be quite good for black. Plays knight b to d5, and after takes, okay, he can regain this pawn whenever he wants. Now is fine. And this light square bishop is really strong and it's unopposed. So black is better here. Material is even. White has no real play to kind of make up for the disadvantage that he's got with respect to that great bishop on d5. So it looks like bishop f7 check, while it looks attractive at first sight, is really not very good. So let's take a look at queen to c3, and this is met by c5. And white can choose several ways to try to meet this pawn move. You can either take on c5 or play something else. So we'll start with rook a to d1, which kind of eyes the black queen on d8. So you can see there could be some variations where he plays d takes c5 and moves the knight. Or if black plays knight takes e4, then knight e4, and then d takes c5, taking advantage of the pin. So queen c7 looks like the safest way to go. dc, dc. And black is a little bit better here. I mean, maybe white's best is to play bishop to d4 to break up this powerful queenside duo, but still, after cd and then knight takes e4, and all of these captures, we end up once again with a position where black has the bishop here. This time it's the dark squared bishop that's unopposed. And after queen to e5, these bishops are very active. The queen is well centralized. And note that white cannot play knight takes b5. This loses. You might want to try to calculate why it loses. Maybe there's more than one solution, but certainly an adequate one is bishop takes f2 check, king f2, rook takes b5, and now he's got to keep the bishop on b3 protected. So let's say queen to c4, keeping the bishop protected, and threatening queen takes f7. On this, black plays queen to f4 check. Now, if the king goes to safety by retreating to g1, then there's queen to e3 check, followed by rook takes b3, and it's all over. There's also king to e2, but on this, black plays rook to f5, and with the white king in the center, it's going to be deadly. queen to f2 mate is the threat, and black wins sooner or later here. Okay, of course white didn't have to play knight takes b5, but black is a bit better here as well. Alright, let's go back. And here, white could also play d takes c5. But again, I think black is a little bit better. dc, bishop f4, and now this nice little Zwischenzug here, knight to d3, rather than moving the rook away. And after takes, knight takes, rook takes, queen takes, e5, and knight to d5. Once again, black's bishop pair is, I think, the most important imbalance in the position, and black should stand a little bit better. Alright, so after bishop to b7, we just looked at rook f to e1 and saw that knight to b4 followed by c5 seems to give black an edge. White could also try d5. Again, knight to b4 is the answer. And after queen to c3, though, c5 is not as good as it was before because of the en passant capture. However, it looks like black is good here too with bishop takes e3, fe3, knight a6, and the knight's going to go to c5 where it's going to be very well placed. And although black has some play with this great knight on d4 in the open f file, it looks like black's trumps are at least as weighty. Knight c5, bishop c2, and now b4. Okay, of course, if queen takes b4, there's bishop takes d5. That's not a good exchange for white. So queen to c4, and now, excuse me, knight f to d7, and the knight is going to jump in on e5 with, again, black holding a superior position, though not very much superior. So this might even be the best that white has. So it's equal to maybe a touch better for black. Again, thanks to this very good dark square control that black has. Alright, so bishop to b7, all the way back here, is what Svidler should have played instead of knight to a5. So after knight to a5, there's going to be a problem. Although, again, for the moment, Svidler thought everything was okay. And only now, when Kamsky played e5, did he realize that there was a bit of trouble. We'll come to this in a moment, but first let's look at d5. So on d5, bishop takes e3, f takes e3, c6. This was a position that Svidler felt that he should hold comfortably, and he's absolutely right. He mentions his critical b4, knight c4, takes and takes, and black is at least equal, probably a little bit better. Although white would be better after knight takes c4 were it not for the Zwischenzug, bishop takes e4. And now it's black who stands a bit better. So Svidler's evaluation of this line with d5 was absolutely correct. And e5, he says, is normally good for black as well, because it chases the knight to a good square, where it now goes to d5, and it weakens white's central complex. So, I mean, the pawns on d4 and e5 are under fire. The black bishops look like they're really ready to go here. But there's one problem that Svidler had missed until, again, white had played e5. And there's the move, the very strong move, bishop to b1. And now black has some real problems. And again, he's lucky that he's not in huge trouble here. So first of all, this does cost him a pawn. The simple threat of queen h7 check and then queen h8, and queen takes g7 is a big deal. And black really has to play g6, which he did. And then white took on h6. So the white center is still intact. There's pressure against the black king, and white has won a pawn. But black is in fact still quite solid, and he will still have pressure against the center after knight to c6, which is what he played. So it's a scary looking position for black, but he can hold on. And indeed, Svidler said that he couldn't see how white could obtain a big advantage, although he suspected that there might be some way. But the engines don't find anything really big either. Alright, well here Kamsky played e takes d6, but probably a better move is queen to e4. And Svidler covered this, but he addressed this when talking to the commentators, to Konstantin Landa, especially after the game. But it looks like he missed something, as Landa showed him as they analyzed this. So d takes e5, d takes e5, and here Svidler was suggesting knight f6, where he said it's not easy for white to find squares for the queen. So one line he gave was queen to e1 or queen to e2, and then black plays knight to d4 when he's fine, according to Svidler. In fact, this is also inaccurate. it's a mistake. White should play bishop to g5 now, and after bishop f3, bishop takes f6. Black is in a bit of trouble. However, he was right, the queen e1 was not so serious, and black should instead play knight takes e5. After knight e5, bishop to d4, and black is going to regain the piece. So f4 is illegal, and if knight 2 to f3, simply bishop takes f3. Bishop f4 is probably the best choice here, but then queen d6 renews the threat, and after knight d to f3, takes, stuff just gets liquidated. And indeed, black is a little bit better here. He's up a pawn, and he's relatively safe. So this should give black an edge. However, instead of queen to e1, there's queen to h4, as Londa pointed out. And then after knight takes e5, bishop to g5. Again, this is Landa's variation. And after knight f3, king g7. At first, Spindler was asserting that he was okay, and of course, then he realized queen h6 check and bishop takes g6 is complete destruction. So white is winning here. All right, so this means that Spindler was mistaken, at least in his preliminary calculations about this. However, he does have a good move here. Maybe two good moves. Okay, knight to d4 is interesting, and it's good enough in a few lines. So, for instance, knight takes d4, and now knight to b4, discovering attack on the queen, and a double attack on the knight on d4. So the queen and the bishop are both hitting it. And after queen f4, queen takes d4, black is fine. So he's down a pawn, but tremendously active, and either b2 or e5 is going to fall. So this is equal. Another try is bishop to g5. On this, black should play knight to f4. And it looks like this will equalize in some complicated variations. White could also probably gain an edge with queen to g4. So probably in both of these lines, both knight d4, queen g4, and knight d4, queen g4, and also bishop to g5. White is probably a touch better. But what black should play here is knight takes e5. And in this case, it looks like it's fine for black. And you might want to try to calculate some of these lines yourself. It's a very complicated position, so it's great practice to see what to try to figure out how the play should continue from here. So the following may be best play. So I think it's equal with best play. There might be some choices here and there, but this is my main line. So knight takes e5, and now f5. All right, which looks a bit crazy. Queen e2, king h7, and believe it or not, black really is threatening to take that bishop. And the point is, okay, if queen g5, bishop g5, you can take it. If bishop f4, you can take it. If bishop e3, you can take on e5. So the bishop's got nowhere safe to go. It can't really be protected in any sensible way. And if white tries knight d to f3, which makes sense, protecting the knight on e5 and clearing some squares for the bishop to retreat, black can take, because if knight f7 check, king g7, knight d8, rook e2, knight b7, rook b7, and material is even, but black has the superior position with pressure against f2 and b2. So this is great for black. So instead of knight to f7 check, white should play queen takes b5, just grabbing the pawn, and now black has another really key decision to make. I mean, he's down a pawn, and white also threatens knight f7 check. He could play king to g7, which isn't so bad, but he's got an even better move, it seems. And that's rook takes e5, knight e5, and now queen f6, which allows a second fork. But after queen to g5, it's white who has to be very careful, because if knight takes b8, knight f4 is just mating. The threat's queen g2 mate, and if something like g3, that doesn't help, because if queen takes g3, taking advantage of the pin. So illustrate this. F takes g3 is impossible because of the bishop on b6. So instead of knight to d7, white might retreat with knight f3. And he's up in exchange in a pawn, but still, after knight to f4, black has tremendous counterplay, threatening bishop takes f3, which not only would allow queen g5, but also makes discoveries possible against the white queen. Additionally, knight h3 is a threat. Also, knight takes g2, followed by queen g5. So there are a lot of things that white has to be really careful about here. So it looks like he can hold the balance, but only just, with a couple of accurate moves. So one is queen to b3, and now black can play bishop to c6, stepping up the threat. So now the threat is to play bishop takes f2 check and then grab the queen. Alright, from here, white has a couple of moves that might be alright. One is king to h2, getting out of the way of the check. Here, knight takes g2 is quite good. King g2, and now bishop to c5 is a nasty little try, hitting the queen. So if queen takes b8, then queen g5 check with mate in, I think, 2 moves. King h2. If king h1, you play bishop f3 check and then queen g2 mate. And if you go to h2, then bishop to d6 check, and that's checkmate. So queen takes b8 is no good. White has to keep that knight on f3 protected. So queen to c3, and now black has at least a draw, but maybe at most a draw, as follows. Alright, so there's a repetition. Alright, going back here, instead of king to h2, white could also play queen to d1, but black is getting very good counter chances with rook to d8, and now g5. So again, white has a substantial material advantage, but black is throwing the kitchen sink here at white. All of his pieces are beautifully posted, and I wouldn't want to be white here. Even if it's a draw with best play, only a draw with best play, from black's point of view, it's still very, very scary for white. Alright, so that's one line. Also, queen to e5 is possible, and I think this move also leads to equality. Just to give a couple of quick possibilities here. One, well, queen takes e5 is forced, knight e5, bishop g2, rook d1, and now either bishop takes h3 or maybe rook to e8 give black good counter chances. Well, and after bishop takes h3, I mean, the material disadvantage is very, very small. It's white has a rook for bishop and a pawn. Black's pieces are all very well coordinated, so I'd be shocked if white had anything real here. Alright, so knight takes e5, I think, is in fact quite good. And so Spidler, I think, is right in his general assessment, but again, he chose the wrong knight move here, at least in his preliminary calculations. Who knows what would have happened in the game had Kamsky played queen to e4. So instead he played e takes d6, and here I think maybe Spidler makes a small inaccuracy, nothing serious, but a little one. Probably the best is knight takes d4, the best move. So knight takes, bishop takes, knight f3, bishop f6, dc, queen c7, and it's about equal here. Maybe white has a tiny advantage. I mean, he's still up his pawn, but the b2 pawn is vulnerable, black's development is very good, and white just doesn't have anything serious. And also, if the b pawns both drop, both players' b pawns drop, and you end up with an endgame where all the pawns are on the king side, that also adds to the drawishness of the position. So here I don't think it's so much drawish as that black has adequate compensation, adequate counterplay for the pawn. But okay, it's not bad for white. Of course, he can push a little bit. So Spidler played queen takes d6, which is maybe a little bit inaccurate. Knight to e4, queen to b4, and now Kamsky has an interesting position, an interesting choice, and you might want to try to figure out what he should do here. So there are a couple of moves that are both pretty interesting. Well, Spidler thought that Kamsky's original idea was to play bishop to d2, and it looks as if black can just wind his way through the complications here, and maybe even be a tiny bit better at the end. So knight takes d4 is the key move. Bishop takes b4, knight c2, bishop takes c2, and here Spidler thought originally that knight takes b4 would be the move. Then he kind of changed his mind and thought that f5 would be even better. But I think he was right the first time. Knight takes b4 is best. Knight f6 check. King h8. Knight e8. Knight c2. Rook a to c1. And all of this seems to be accurate play after bishop to d2. And Spidler saw all of this and more. He continued his line, what he saw during the game. Bishop takes f3. Here if g takes f3, then knight d4 and black is even a bit better. So rook c2, bishop e4, hitting the rook, and of course the knight's still prisoner. So rook takes c7 is forced, rook e8, rook f7. So this was what Spidler worked out, and probably Kamsky worked out the same line. And black is objectively fine here. So white has, if you're going by textbook counting, white's up a point, but really not. I mean, the two bishops give black at least equality here, maybe even a tiny edge after king to g8. Note that it's also possible for black to play knight to e3 in this position. That was a suggestion of Landa's, and this also seems to be quite reasonable. Maybe not better, but interesting as well. So instead of bishop to d2, Kamsky played bishop to a2. And at first this looks like this is winning, because if the knight moves away, then there are these ideas with, so if this guy goes, then there's knight f6 check, and queen takes g6, and the lonely black king is going to perish. He's going to have a lot of company, but none of that company is going to be his own forces. So this looks horrible. And also there could be lines where the knight jumps into g5, and you've got this just massive avalanche of white forces going to kill the king. So it looks like it's just decisive. And again, this is a good position to try to figure out what in the world black should do to stay alive. Well, I should say too that for those of you who've already seen this game, and I hope it's not all of you, because it's really great to just see this for the first time. Anyway, it was already at this point that Svidler saw the fantastic winning move that shows up a few moves later. All right. Well, the only move here is knight takes d4. So this counterattacking shot. Now, if knight takes d4, black should play probably bishop takes d4, and he's at least equal. So he's got the f6 square adequately covered, so he's all right. And knight f6 check is not going to win the game. Black can recapture with the bishop, and queen takes g6, king h8 should be a dead end. So knight f6 check is what Kamsky played, and king to h8. Okay, and maybe that can be played in some other cases too. All right, and now white has a choice. So he can take one knight or the other. Which one should he do? What should he do in this position? Well, I think probably he should play knight takes d5. And now it seems that, well, okay, I shouldn't say that he should play it. Maybe objectively the best move is knight takes d5, but practically speaking, he can't do this, I guess, because black can more or less force a draw, at least in many of the lines. There is one line where the play continues. So knight takes f3 check, and now if g takes f3, bishop takes d5, bishop takes d5, black plays queen to h4 and is at least equal here. If he can take this bishop on h6 with impunity, then he's regained material equality with a superior position. I mean, his king is going to be much safer than white's. White can save the bishop, but the problem is, if he does, then black has at least perpetual with queen g3, h3, g3, and so on, world without end. So g takes f3 is unacceptable as a practical matter. All right, king h1 then, queen h4, and again, if you take on f3, then you're allowing at least an immediate perpetual, and in fact it's a losing move. So queen c3 check is best here, bishop to d4, queen takes f3, queen takes h6, queen f7, and now, for instance, something like c5, not the only move, but a good move. And white's up a pawn, but black has very good compensation. I mean, the bishop on d4 is majestic. The knight on d5 looks great, but if it moves, then there's the possibility of queen takes h3, mating, and again, just all of the black forces are quite well posted here. So this would be a position of dynamic equilibrium. All right, so knight takes d5 was playable. It's not quite a forced draw. There is a line where white can continue to play, although black is in good shape. Kamsky chose instead knight takes d4, knight f6, and now knight to c6. And here we have, things are heating up again. What should black do at this point? If he plays, well, again, I think this is a good place to try to gain your bearings and figure out how black should handle a position. The most obvious move is bishop takes c6. And after queen takes c6, to play queen h4. So material is equal. We're hitting the bishop on h6. Maybe rook e2 is coming next. But the problem is that after bishop to e3, the black coordination kind of falters a bit. And the black attacking chances are basically gone here. I mean, without the light square bishop, he just doesn't have enough mustard here to spice things up. Meanwhile, his c7 pawn is going to be weak, the f7 pawn is going to be weak, and if bishop takes e3, white has the f-file to play with as well. So this is definitely a better position for white. So instead of bishop takes c6, Svidler played queen to h4. And now it's another crucial moment for white. What do we do here? He's got lots and lots of attacking units in play, but so does black. So we've got to be careful here. All right. First thing to notice is that bishop to e3 is not good in this case. So it was fine when the bishop on b7 was gone for the knight on c6, but this time it's not good because rook takes e3, fe3, and now rook e8, and in fact black is winning here. So the threat of taking on e3 either way, but probably best with the rook, is really just lethal. I mean, then there's discovery threats. There are threats to capture on h3, maybe to play knight to g4 in some cases if the king goes to the h-file. And the white knight is stuck on c6 because, I mean, opening up that diagonal too will just be catastrophic. So bishop to e3 is not good for white in this case. Now, he could retreat the bishop somewhere else, but then black plays rook to a8, for instance, and he's in great shape there. If nothing else, there might be something even better than that. All right, so bishop retreats are not really going to help. He could play bishop takes f7. All right, this is certainly a possible move. Queen takes h6, bishop e8, rook e8, something like rook a to e1. And white can still play on here, but black should be a little bit better. I mean, again, the two bishops versus the rook and the pawn will most of the time favor the side with the bishop here. And black's king is a little bit exposed, or at least it appears to be a little exposed, but there doesn't seem to be any way for white to get at it. And so for that reason, black should stand slightly better here. All right, well, what about the obvious knight takes b8? Okay, this was, in fact, what Kamsky played. So what should black do here? One obvious move is to play queen to g3, threatening mate, and the problem is that white plays knight to c6, and you'd have to find something here. All right, so we'll come back to this position a bit later. So queen g3 is at least not immediately decisive by any means. Another interesting move is bishop to e4. So this tries to get the bishop outside of the knight, and then to play queen to g3 next. The problem with this is that white has this x-ray defense with queen to g5, and here black can resign because he's just going to be down too much material. He's down to rook right now, and he's going to stay down to rook because after queen g5, bishop g5, the knight on f6 is hanging. Well, I guess he could play knight h7 and maybe slightly minimize the deficit, but he's still going to be completely lost. Svidler also noted that if knight to g4, white can play bishop to f4, and again, the black attack is at an end, and white's material advantage is going to decide. So bishop to e4 doesn't work either. Okay, there's also just the very obvious move, queen takes h6. I mean, this really isn't that bad. Knight to c6, king to g7, and although white is up a full exchange at this point, again, black has very, very active pieces. The bishop pair is quite dangerous, and there's still a lot of fight left in the position. For instance, if queen to b3, then black plays queen to g5. Okay, threatening mate. Sorry, not threatening mate, but well, threatening a threatened mate. I mean, something like rook to e6 is on the agenda here, but okay, not threatening mate just yet, of course. It also clears h6 for the king. That's the key thing. So with queen to b3, the threat's to play queen f7 check, and then queen takes f6 check. So queen g5 eyes the g2 mating possibility, protects the knight, and gives the king the h6 square. Probably white's best here is rook a to c1. Okay, now rook to e6, threatening to take, and also stopping queen f7. White's best is queen to f3, protecting the knight again, and hitting the rook on e6 with the bishop. And here we can have this funny repetition. Rook e5, threatening rook to f5, perhaps. And white's best is just to repeat, and this would be a draw. Okay, instead of queen to b3, white could also try rook f to e1, not letting or trying not to let the rook get active. so here a drawing path, or a path to equal chances, not necessarily a draw, is bishop c6, queen c6, rook e1, and now queen at e2. And black takes one pawn or the other, after which he'll have a pawn for the exchange and sufficient counter chances to maintain a rough balance. Alright, so queen takes h6 is interesting, it's possible, but the play is still roughly balanced there. As we saw, bishop to e4 is bad, queen g3 at least seemed to be unresolved. But there's another move, which is what Svidler had seen some time ago, and Kamsky clearly had missed. Or maybe he saw it, but hoped for the best here. So the move, and this is fantastic, is rook to e2. Black is down a rook. What does he do? He puts a second rook en prise and puts it on an empty square. So he's not even taking something to play this. He just puts it beautifully on this completely unoccupied square. And this is absolutely devastating. White has no good response to this. The point of this move, well, there's 2 points. I mean, one is what happens if white doesn't take the rook. The other, of course, is what happens if he does. And what happens if he does take the rook is that after queen takes e2, then black plays queen to g3, and now if white plays knight to c6, it does absolutely nothing. The queen's no longer on c2 supporting it, and so white has no way at all to close the diagonal, the a8 to h1 diagonal. So it's just mate. He can make some spite interpositions. He can play knight to c6 and bishop to d5 and queen f3, and all that happens is that black keeps playing bishop takes, whatever piece gets thrown in the way, and then finally queen takes g2 mate. Fantastic idea. Well, what else can white do? So he can't take the rook. Is there something else he can do? Well, he could try. Oh, sorry. Before we get to that, I'll also point out, going back here. So I had mentioned that after knight takes b8, queen g3, knight c6 was there. Here too, black could play rook to e2. It doesn't win this time, but it is good enough for equality in this funny case. So again, queen takes e2 is losing to bishop c6. That's just the exact same thing as in the game. Alright, so this would be a blunder. He could play queen to c3 though, and it looks as if something like this is approximately equal, though it's really hard to believe. I mean, it seems that here, since black is just down a tiny bit of material, he's got a bishop and a pawn for the rook, his rook's active, the bishop is fantastic on this long diagonal, the knight could jump into e4 or h5. How could black only be equal here? But it seems to be the case. And one of the things is that white's threatening to play rook to d2, and if black plays knight to e4 to stop that, then white can play bishop to d5 and close the diagonal and swap some pieces and activate his rook on a1 for that matter. So maybe white is okay here. But in the game, after rook to e2, he most definitely is not okay. Alright, so the problem for white is that he can't take, as we saw, and if he moves the queen, then the rook is extremely powerful on e2. So if, for instance, queen to b3, then both bishop takes f2 check and rook takes f2 are mating. So, for instance, bishop f2, king h1, bishop takes g2 check, king g2, bishop e3 check, and then queen h3 is mate. Unhappy days. So Kamsky tried queen to c3 instead, and again, bishop takes f2 is fine, but Svidler played rook takes f2, which leads to a nice finish. Knight to c6, so he gets to close his diagonal, but it's way too little, way too late. Rook takes f1 check, and Kamsky resigned because if king takes f1, he's up a rook, but he gets mated by queen f2. If he runs away with king to h2, well, rook takes a1, and black is now up a rook and a pawn, and he's threatening various quick mates that ultimately can't be prevented. So after rook takes f1 check, Kamsky resigned. So fantastic game, and again, the combination with rook to e2 as the culminating point was really tremendous. I mean, so this is a game that'll definitely make the anthologies and all the magazines in the near term, and lots of tactics books in the long term. So I hope you enjoyed this game. If you didn't, you should probably take up something else like I don't know, like checkers. I have no idea. Bungee jumping. Something crazy. because this is about as good as the game's going to get. Anyway, so hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something, but primarily I hope you just enjoyed it. It was a wonderful game. All right, thanks a lot. See you next time. Bye bye.